Hey guys, welcome back to Etherborn. Today I have some r/no sleep stories that I think you guys might enjoy. If you do enjoy these stories, let me know below with a like or a comment or consider subscribing. Any support really helps. Thank you. Mary was born in a black and white room, and scientists didn't let her see colors until she turned 18. She saw something we didn't. Mary's room, also known as the knowledge argument, is a philosophical concept concerning a hypothetical woman named Mary who has never seen color. She has only ever existed in a black and white room. Mary studies the world through books and a monochromatic television screen. She reads about colors, but she does not experience them visually. Can the universe be fully understood in purely physical terms? The answer differs depending on whether one believes that we know fundamental truths about reality, a priori without experience, or a posteriori with experience. In other words, will Mary learn anything about color when she leaves the black and white room? It was a thought experiment. Nobody was supposed to actually do it. However, in 2007, a group of researchers sought to answer that question. And the experiment they conducted would have been condemned by boards of ethics across the globe, but these were not ethical scientists, and this was no ethical organization. I would have decried its actions back then. This wasn't why I joined the agency, but I was afraid. After all, they were willing to put an innocent baby in a colorless prison cell, doomed to grow up in near solitary confinement. Save for a nurse-dubbed nanny, what would they have done to a whistleblower? I don't know how they found the baby, and I don't want to know. Whether a parent willingly gave her up or one of the scientists intentionally bred her for the experiment, the results remain the same. A baby, named Mary, in honor of her philosophical concept which inspired the horrifying experiment, was placed in a white, windowless, foam-padded cell. She was blindfolded whenever her nurse entered the room to provide food, formula, and fresh clothes. Always the same black onesie, with coverings like mittens and socks to cover her hands and feet. She was also made to wear a facial covering, akin to a balaclava, which covered her face. There was no mouth slit to avoid her seeing the color of her lips, and she wore black contacts in her eyes. Equally, Nanny wore the exact same attire every time she entered the room. To put it simply, Mary's daily outfit was horrid. Barely any more humane than a straitjacket and a bag over the head. There was no room for error. Mary was watched by at least one person at all hours of day and night. Should she get curious and try to sneak a peek at the color of her skin or eyes, she would receive 100 volts and a collar attached to her neck. But more terrifyingly than that was the simple fact that Mary was well trained. So well trained that she never, in her 18 years of imprisonment, even attempted to take a peek at her skin. She was such a willing prisoner, having never known anything else, that I think she would have stayed in her room even if the door had been standing ajar. This initially seemed excessive, given that copious measures had been taken to ensure no reflective surfaces would be allowed within the room. Even the television monitor was fitted with an anti-glare screen. However, scientists were paranoid that Mary might somehow catch a glimpse of her green eyes. Even seeing her pale peach-colored skin would have dirtied the results of the experiment. Black and white. Those were the only shades that Mary was permitted to see. And when Mary started walking and talking, Nanny stopped entering the room entirely. Fresh food and clothes were delivered through a horizontal slit in the steel door, and Mary was always instructed to wear a blindfold before changing or using the bathroom, which comprised of a white porcelain toilet and a black shower head fixed to a foam wall. Revoltingly, both were exposed to that titchy room of hers. Her entire world was a box, stretching a mere 4 meters across all 3 dimensions. I wanted to save her numerous times over the years, wanted to leave that horrid place behind, but I'm a coward. Besides, we wouldn't have gotten far. There's no running from these people. And the agency isn't even the greatest horror of the story. On Mary's 18th birthday, Dr. Robson delivered a thrilling message over the speaker. "Happy birthday, Mary," he said in a monotone lacking empathy. "Thank you," the girl meekly responded. "Will there be chocolate cake this year?" I wasn't fond of the lemon cake last year, you see." "Today, we'll be celebrating in a different way, Mary," Robson replied. "Do you know your age?" "I'm 18, she croaked. "Does that mean—" "Yes, Mary," Dr. Robson said. "Today, you leave the room." "I'll see color?" she asked rather innocently. Any sane and well-developed human in the outside world would have simply been glad to have freedom, but Mary had no concept of freedom, no concept of a prison. She had no understanding that this childhood had been abnormal, worse than abnormal, inhuman. To keep Mary compliant, her schooling had been rigid, with books that purposely omitted any dangerous ideas. The result of that? A girl relishing at the opportunity to not escape from a prison, but to simply see color.
Yes, Mary. You'll see color. Nanny is already on her way to fetch you.
Dr. Robson said. We watched live footage, filmed in a closed-circuit camera from our operational room. Nanny unlocked the weighty entrance to Mary's room, and we all waited with bated breath. Waited as Nanny aided Mary in removing her black headgear. I heard Mary giggling giddily, and, unnervingly, as the bag was removed from her head and the contacts were removed from her eyes, and then, as her first experience with a color other than black or white, Nanny removed her own black outfit to reveal a striking red dress beneath. Mary gasped. It was an intake of breath so sharp that she seemed to stop breathing. Perhaps, for a moment, she had stopped breathing.
What are you experiencing?
Dr. Robson said.
Is it new? Does it feel like...
I knew it, Mary whispered, with vocal cords that sounded as if they were on the verge of snapping. Then her giggling picked up again, seeming to unnerve Nanny. This is why you did the experiment, isn't it?
Does this feel like a new experience, Mary?
Robson added with a hint of impatience. Seeming oblivious to Nanny's discomfort, it was plainly clear to me, even through grainy camera footage. Mary shot her teary face up to the camera. Yes, but I've been waiting for it.
Yes, I know that, Mary.
Robson groaned.
But so have I. Tell me about it. Tell me about the red. How does it feel to experience true color for the first time? We're seeing some interesting brain activity on the screen here, but your words would really help us too.
I'm not talking about the red, Mary interjected, and jabbed an accusatory finger at Nanny's dress in a way that frightened me. Certainly frightened Nanny, who jumped backwards. I'm talking about that, she giggled. I knew there was something you were leaving out of the books and TV shows over the years.
What are you saying, Mary?
Robson asked.
I don't understand. Red. You're looking at red.
Red, and the second color, she insisted. The color you didn't describe in the books. None of the adjectives you'd use described this one. Red is just as stark, powerful, and passionate as described. The blue color of Nanny's eyes is as soothing and tender as described, but this other color on her dress is just...
What other color?
Robson cried.
It's just red, Mary.
Right here, Mary yelled as she lunged forwards and prodded Nanny in the abdomen. The woman in the red dress jumped backwards, clutching her stomach, and then Mary's eyes went wide. Oh, she whimpered.
What, Mary?
Robson asked.
Please, tell us what you're seeing.
What I saw, she whispered, moving her finger up to Nanny's face. It moved up there, and now it's gone.
Please describe this other color to us, Mary.
Robson said, before putting an image up on Mary's television set.
Which one of those is it?
Mary's eyes shot to the television screen and quickly scanned the 12 main colors on the screen. It's not one of those. Not a different shade of one of those. It's a different color.
There are 10 million possible permutations of color, Mary.
Robson said.
Perhaps you just...
No, Dr. Robson, the girl interrupted, panting heavily as her eyes darted back to Nanny's face, studying it. I understand how shades work. The shade of blue on the screen differs from the color of Nanny's eyes. But that other color, it wasn't included on the screen. It was... Mary stopped and widened her eyes. Then she said, I'm sorry. Nanny frowned. That's okay, Mary. I know you didn't mean to. Not you, Mary hissed, before leaning forwards and trying to look into Nanny's mouth. I'm sorry I saw you.
Mary, you're not making any sense.
Dr. Robson said.
I think we've done enough today. We'll do more tomorrow, so...
I wasn't supposed to see it, Mary moaned, shooting backwards, clunking into a foam wall, then seizing clumps of her straggly hair. Oh God, why don't you see it? It's... Nanny. It's in you. Nanny looked up at the camera. Dr. Robson sighed, then pinched the bridge of his nose between two fingers.
Fine, Nanny.
Nanny had already spun on her heel to leave. She would have done so regardless of whether Robson gave her permission, as Mary was clearly disturbing her. But she barely took one step before her body fixed itself to the floor, and then Nanny juddered like a fleshy bobblehead. I was overcome by a warm sensation across my skin, and moments later there came a thunderous explosion. Skin flew into walls from a red eruption of dress fragments, blood, and guts. Nanny had spontaneously exploded. Screams filled the operating room. Some fled, some fainted, and others simply froze. I don't even know whether any of them noticed it. Noticed Mary clawing her eyes out, leaving streaks of blood and tears across her cheeks as, mere minutes after seeing colors for the first time, she ensured that she would never see anything else ever again. I'm sorry, the eyeless woman wailed. I didn't know I wasn't allowed. Please, I'll never see you again. as I saw a trail of blood run from Nanny's destructed corpse towards the front door, clearly painted by something unseen. A deep dread filled my chest. I realized that my fleeing colleagues had the right idea, so I followed. Fled in fear, leaving Dr. Robson and my frozen coworkers behind. I don't remember leaving the building, getting in my car, or going home. But I must have done those things, otherwise I wouldn't be here. Wouldn't be posting this for all of you. It's been 4 hours. 4 hours since Mary saw color for the first time. Saw a color that none of us saw. What was it? Why could only Mary see it? My son keeps talking to the audience. My son Cade is smart. He's only 6 years old, halfway through the first grade, and he's already begun reading books that even I struggle to get through. He's a sharp kid, but he has some quirks. And listen, all kids have quirks. One thing I've learned as a relatively new father is that kids are weird. They talk to the walls, eat bugs, see things in their reflection that aren't there. You get the gist. Kids really do the darndest things. But recently, my son has reached a new level of oddity. One that is out of my jurisdiction as the oblivious, goofball dad who still makes hot dogs for every meal. I became a single parent after my wife passed away a few years back. It's been impossibly difficult. I won't sugarcoat it. Being the sole caretaker of Cade has been the single hardest thing I've ever had to do next to attending my wife's funeral. Cade, though he was only 4 at the time, took his mother's passing hard. He would ask for her constantly, throwing wild fits, thrashing around like a fish out of water. At any minor convenience, he would beg for his mother. I didn't know how to handle it. He'd often throw tantrums in public, wailing like a banshee in Home Depot as passerbys would stare with judgment spilling out of their wide eyes. I felt utterly helpless. All I could do was attempt to calm him down in a hushed tone, promising that Daddy was there to help him. But Daddy was not enough. Every child needs their mother. I remember wishing I had the funds to take Cade to see a child psychologist or at least a licensed medical professional. I work in construction and barely make enough to pay each month's rent, let alone provide health care for my poor son. Looking back now, I should have downsized so I could afford it. Cade's explosive fits continued until about a few months ago. These tantrums would occur every other day, if not daily. Then suddenly they dwindled down to once a week. Then, after another month, none at all. I was relieved, to say the least. It was a weight off my chest to avoid the pointed glares from strangers in the streets as I'd haul a hysterical Cade into the car, practicing the patience I didn't know I had until fatherhood. But once Cade's meltdowns ceased, a new issue presented itself. One that scared me far more than any tantrum I've ever seen him throw. Imaginary friends. I know what you're thinking. Every kid has imaginary friends. And you're right. But Cade's imaginary friends were a little bit different. He called them the audience. It began one night during dinner, when I had the bright idea to saute some spinach alongside boiling the usual hot dogs in hopes Cade would get his greens in somehow. I scooped a heap onto his plate and placed it in front of him, beckoning him to try. "It's good," I said, feigning a smile. "Popeye eats it to get big and strong." Cade looked at the plate, quizzically looked at me, and looked back at the plate. He sat there for a while, staring the spinach down as if it were the innards of an alien creature. He looked at me again as if I might be crazy, then pushed the plate away. "No, thank you." "Cade," I said warningly, my dad voice making an appearance, "you have to at least try it." Cade made a humming noise, as if pondering this deeply, and began to stroke his chin. "I'm not sure," he said finally. "Let me ask the audience." Cade turned to face the window next to the kitchen table. The window faced our backyard, though dusk had long since departed. The outside world was dark as doom. My son, staring out into the window of nothingness, appeared as if he were simply looking at his reflection. The lights in the kitchen and the contrasting darkness outside created a mirror-esque effect. "What do you think?" There was deafening silence for a moment. I arched an eyebrow, waiting for the imaginary response from his mysterious audience. It was the first time I'd heard him mention them. I figured it was his new, foolproof method of avoiding any vegetable consumption that evening. After a moment too long, Cade turned back around to face me. "They said no." I scoffed and gestured to his plate, once more. "I'm sure they did. Now go on, have a bite." "No, I can't." "I'm not allowed," he said. "Cade, knock it off. Please eat your spinach." "No, Daddy, they said no." I had assumed he would whine like he usually did when he didn't get his way, but this time his tone sounded different. Desperation clung to his voice as if he were begging me to understand. I dropped it. I was too tired to fight him. He went to bed with a belly full of hot dogs unaccompanied by sautéed spinach. Unfortunately, the audience wasn't as easy to get rid of as a plate of boiled hot dogs. The following week, Cade's imaginary friends made an appearance once again. I was trying to get Cade in his pajamas for bedtime. The usual routine went pajamas, teeth brushing, bedtime story, lights out. Always the same order. But tonight was different. Cade decided to brush his teeth before changing into pajamas. "What about PJs, buddy?" I asked him, curious about his change of routine. He had been doing this bedtime routine the very same way since before my wife passed. I imagined the routine was comforting to him, reminding him of when my wife was still around. Which is why it was so odd that he had decided to switch things up suddenly. "The audience told me to do it this way now," he replied with a mouthful of toothpaste froth. There they were again. The audience. A sudden curiosity crept into my mind. Why? Cade glanced at his open bedroom window quickly. I don't know, they just did. A sudden chill ran down my spine. I hadn't remembered those curtains being open. Curtains are always closed before bedtime routine. I walked to the window and pulled them shut. After story time, when it was lights out, Cade refused to let me touch the light switch. "Dad, the audience wants the lights on." Cade cupped his tiny hands over the switch against his bedroom wall, creating a makeshift barrier, refusing to budge. "Nice try, Cade, but the audience doesn't get to decide the rules." Fear flashed on Cade's face as he snapped his head to look at me, wide-eyed. "Don't say that, Daddy." His calm tone was eerie, and I took a step backward. "Cade, please, you can't stay up all night just because the audience told you to." "Yes, I can," Cade responded, his voice low. He was staring at the windows, curtain closed and all. At this point, I was thoroughly unnerved. If I'm being honest, something in my gut was telling me these imaginary friends were not very friendly. Not just an excuse to get out of vegetable eating, but an excuse for Cade to be up to no good. Even still, I had paternal duties to attend to. "Well, tell the audience to say goodnight." I scooped Cade into my arms despite his pleas and tiny fists of rage. I placed him gently on his bed and made my way towards his bedroom door, flicking the light switch off, signaling he had no choice in the matter. The lights in Cade's room remained on. I stopped in my tracks, spinning around, trying the light switch once, twice, 3 times again. The light didn't turn off. The switch must have been broken somehow, I thought. Despite my rational explanation for the phenomenon, the panic that began to bubble in my chest did not subside. "You're sleeping with me tonight." The next morning, the light switch was working again, and I was able to exhale the breath I hadn't realized I had been holding. But that feeling of relief didn't last long, as the week that followed was filled with even more peculiar coincidences. I say peculiar, but I think a more suited adjective would be horrifying. On Friday, Cade said the audience doesn't want him to go to school. I'd get a flat tire on my way to drop him off. On Monday, Cade says the audience doesn't like Jacob because he hogs the soccer ball during recess. On Tuesday, Jacob falls and breaks his arm. He'd be out of school for 2 weeks. On Thursday, Cade says the audience doesn't like Mr. Teddy, Cade's favorite stuffed animal, anymore. Mr. Teddy is found slashed open from belly up, fluffy guts spilling from his abdomen. I began having trouble deciphering whether this was Cade's new method of acting out, or if it really was some sort of ominous force at play. I could have rationed each occurrence away by blaming Cade, but I knew in my soul that Cade wasn't that kind of kid. He was sensitive and bright. He was no teddy bear killer. The audience began to infiltrate my thoughts more than I would have liked it to. It was all Cade would talk about, and more often than not, the audience would lead Cade down the path of destruction. Everything came to a head this past Saturday night while I used the bathroom, leaving Cade unattended in the living room watching an episode of his show. As I was washing my hands, I heard a loud crash, followed by a glass shattering. I ran to the living room and found Cade looking guilty as ever, standing next to a wedding picture of my wife and me. Glass shattered across the hardwood floor, smashed to bits. My instinctual response was to make sure he wasn't hurt, which thank God he wasn't. But afterward, an inexplicable anger coursed through me. "Cade, why would you do something like that?" "It wasn't me, it was them, the audience." "Go to your room," I shouted, and Cade scurried up the stairs in tears. After a few minutes of feeling consumed with guilt, I started towards his room to apologize. I stood in front of the doorway for a moment, preparing myself for a long apology when I heard Cade's voice. He was talking to himself in his room. Well, he was speaking to someone, but I heard no response. "But I don't want to do that," I heard him murmur. "I love my daddy." I walked into Cade's room the second I heard him referring to me, and he looked spooked, like I had caught him with his hands in a cookie jar. He was positioned by the window, kneeling, facing the blackness of the night beyond. I could have swore I saw something move by the window, a figure cloaked by the lightless sky. Cade? I said slowly. Who were you talking to in here? Cade didn't respond. Instead, he got on his feet, arms hanging by his side, and dramatically flopped onto his bed, face pressed into the mattress. This was Cade for get the hell out of my room. Though I was still fixated on the window exposed by the open curtains, I snapped out of my trace to focus on my priorities. Cade, I said softly. Daddy is very sorry for yelling. Cade let out a humph, but kept his face against the mattress, refusing to look at me. Is there something you wanted to talk about? Maybe a reason why you're feeling sad? I tried to coax it out of him, but he wouldn't budge. It wasn't me, he said, his voice muffled by the bedding. It was them. You didn't break that picture of Mommy and I? No, it was them. His voice cracked, and he lifted his face, tears spilling down his cheeks. They're everywhere, Daddy. I don't like them anymore. Who, Cade? Who is everywhere? Cade was practically choking on his sobs now. The audience. They told me that you don't like me anymore because Mommy died. They told me Mommy got sick and lost all her hair, and now she's in the ground. My chest seized up. Cade, who told you that? I never told him his mother had gotten cancer. I rarely ever speak about her passing, for that matter. My wife and I had purposely sheltered him from it till the very end of her life, only allowing the happy memories to seep through the cracks of his memory. They did. They told me to open all the curtains so they could get you, Daddy. As much as I hate to admit it, at that moment I was terrified. I felt my heart rate spike as I watched my son, dripping in saliva and salty tears, imagining phantom arms reaching through the windowsills and dragging us into the never-ending nothingness. Sweetheart, I take a deep breath, attempting to steady my voice. There's no such thing as the audience. They're imaginary. They're not going to get either of us. You're safe and sound here with me. I pulled him into a hug, squeezing him tightly as if to show this audience that they were not taking my Cade. They're real, I heard him whisper, his head buried in my shoulder. That night, I lay with him in bed until he fell asleep. I was careful not to wake him as I kissed his rosy, tear-streaked cheeks goodnight, ensuring he was finally out. I felt at peace knowing he was tucked in bed, safe. I made my way downstairs to tidy up the kitchen, cleaning the pile of stray dishes left from dinner. I went over to the sink and began scrubbing. I had only gotten through maybe 3 or 4 when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I froze instinctively, fixating on the pan in the sink, mid-scrub. There was something in the window, something my intuition was screaming at me not to look at. It was peeking at me, rising slowly into my peripheral vision. I felt the hairs on my arms rise, a chill running through me. Something was right in front of me, standing in front of the window. I couldn't bring myself to look. If I'm being completely honest, I was scared shitless. I could feel it staring at me, its eyes burning into the top of my head. I was afraid that if I acknowledged it, it would truly and entirely exist. In my motionless trace, I felt them begin to appear. They were all around me, their presence, one by one, being made known in front of every window of the house. This was their debut. I could feel each one in my bones, peering at first, then slowly rising in front of each open window in our home until they had reached their full length. Then they were all around me, staring at me through thin sheets of glass. It was only a matter of time. I couldn't move. Aside from my shaking hands still clutching the bubble-soaked pan in the kitchen sink, all I could do was think about my son. Cade was still upstairs. I couldn't abandon him. These things had been tormenting him for weeks, and now was my chance to put a stop to it. To protect him. I knew I had only one option at this point. I sprang into action, launching myself from the kitchen sink and racing to my son's room. I saw them in the windows. They didn't move, didn't even flinch as I bounded up the stairs. They were colorless blurs as I ran past them, realizing then, and only then, that my house had far too many windows. I could make out some of their features, and honestly, I wish I hadn't. Their eyes bulged unnaturally, so wide you could see the whites of them from top to bottom, and their mouths gaped open like the scream painting, far too wide for any human caliber, as if they had unhinged their jaw. Their skin was moist and pale and hairless, with swollen heads and skinny necks, bone-thin bodies gawking at me with that fixed expression, as if they were enthralled, captivated by the show. But there were no screams, none except for my own, of course. No sounds besides the thumping of my heart as it hammered into my chest. I nearly tore Cade's door off his hinges, finding him sleeping peacefully in bed. That's where we've been for the past few hours, hiding under his covers, waiting for this nightmare to end, if it ever does. All I know is this. If your Cade ever tells you they're talking to the audience, run. I just found my wife outside. I'm sitting here freaking out. It's 3:17 a.m. and I just found my wife outside. This is going to be a mess as I'm still shaking, but let me explain it as best as I can. So, a bunch of years ago, we lived in another house. One time I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard noises coming from the other half of the house. I quietly opened the bedroom door and immediately saw a light on in my wife's study, which was situated next to the kitchen. The house we lived in was a few blocks away from the bad neighborhood, so my immediate thought was that someone had broken in and was going through the stuff in my wife's room. As my wife had come to bed with me several hours prior, and as far as I knew, she was still in bed. I crept to the house and was ready to confront the person in the room when I realized it was my wife. In my still half-asleep state, I just assumed she was still in bed. Turns out she had woken up, couldn't get back to sleep, and so went to her room to browse Facebook or whatever for a while. I had almost confronted my own wife, thinking she was a burglar. Now, in our current house, we have a screen door and a wooden door. The wooden door has a deadbolt on it, and you have to make sure that you take the house keys with you, because if you close the wooden door, you're not getting back in unless you grab the hidden spare key or knock on the door/window to be let back in. So it's about an hour ago. I'm woken up by the front door rattling. I immediately grab my phone and pull up the security camera located right by the front door. To my surprise, I see my wife standing there, kinda shivering. It's definitely her because we've been married for over a decade, and I know what my own wife looks like. She's dressed in the same clothing she wore yesterday, a red top and black pants. 100% her. I don't know what she's doing outside, but she is. Confused, I roll over, and there's my wife, fast asleep. Remembering the incident from our last place, I use my phone screen to shine a light on her and confirm that it's definitely her, and she's definitely in the bed. At this point, I'm really confused. I get up and make my way through the house to the front door. As I walk into the lounge room, our cat looks up at me, half asleep. Normally she's super curious about stuff going on outside, and I would have thought that hearing the screen door rattling would have caused her to be at the door trying to see what was going on. But it's as if she hasn't heard a thing. I stand by the door and call out, "Who is it?" "It's me. Hurry up and let me back in. I'm freezing." I went outside because I heard something, but forgot to take the keys in my bag with me. It absolutely sounds like my wife. Accent, intonation, knowledge about where her set of keys are, everything, but I'm not convinced because I've just seen her sleeping in my bed with my own eyes. "Hold on a second," I tell her. Now I'm heading back through the house and up to the bedroom. I wake up my wife and say, "This is really fucking weird. You have to see this." I open up the camera app and show her the front door. She's still at the door looking around, wondering what I'm doing because all I need to do to let her back in is turn the handle on the deadbolt and open the door. My wife says, "What the fuck? When was that recorded?" I tell her, "It's not. This is live. You're standing outside by the front door. I just went down there and asked who it was, and your voice told me it was you, and that I should let you back in because you're freezing and you left your keys in your bag." My wife gets up and peers through the bedroom window, as you can just see the front door alcove from there. She gasps and pulls the curtains up. She turns around, and I'll never forget the look on her face as long as I live. She's terrified. "That's me," she says. At this point, I'm freaking the fuck out. I'm wide awake. I'm speaking to my wife, and I'm physically touching her while trying to peer out the window with her. But there she is, standing outside in the very outfit she wore today. Same hair, same glasses, same everything. We walk into the lounge room, and I grab a big torch I have. It's a big, sturdy, metal, super bright light, great for blinding people and hitting them if they get too close. We stand by the door again. "What's your name?" I ask. She tells me her full name, including her middle name. It's correct. "What's your birth date?" She tells me. It's also correct. "What did we have for dinner tonight?" She tells me this too, and tells me that I cooked it. This is right too. I can hear my real wife standing next to me, trying to control her breathing, as she's scared out of her wits. I nudge her and whisper, "Ask her something only you would know." After a moment to steady herself and think of something, she speaks. "When we last stayed with my parents, what change had Dad made to my old room?" There was a pause. "Who is that?" the person outside said. "Why aren't you letting me in? You know it's me. You're starting to freak me out here. Who is that inside with you? Is that a recording of me? What's going on here?" I said, "Answer the question. What change had been made to your room when we last visited?" Another pause, then finally, there was a second bed added, as Max and Damien, my brother-in-law's two kids, slept in there while visiting Mom and Dad. There's an audible gasp from my wife next to me. Now we're both freaked out. I grab her hand and lead her back into the bedroom and turn the lights on. We're still awake, watching the cameras. The other person walked towards the backyard, presumably to grab the spare key, but that was about 40 minutes ago, and I haven't seen them since. I'm too shit scared to go to bed because I'm scared that this person, who knew everything about my wife, will find the spare key and enter. I don't know who the fuck they really are or what they want, but I'm not sleeping. If someone knocks on your door, don't look through the peephole. I know it sounds paranoid. I know it's instinct, muscle memory. Someone knocks, you check. It's normal. It used to be normal for me too, until I learned it wasn't. I've always hated being contacted out of the blue. A random number calls me, I won't pick up. If it's important, they'll leave a message. Ever had a coworker message you on Teams without any prior warning? Took me a while to get used to that, but the worst, the absolute worst, is someone knocking on my door unannounced. It started back in university. I was living in a tiny apartment, just me and a lot of bad habits. I'd be smoking or maybe just too busy to clean, then knock knock. The sound would hit me like a punch to my chest. My whole body would go stiff. I'd tiptoe over, careful not to make a sound, and peek through the peephole. Most of the time, I didn't open the door. Just pretended I wasn't home. Was it introversion? Paranoia? I don't know, but it stuck. 15 years later, in a dozen different apartments, I still did it. When someone knocked, I tiptoed to the door, checked, and if I didn't feel like it, I wouldn't open up. Maybe some unresolved anxiety. It worked. I didn't have to deal with unexpected visitors, and if it was important, they'd find another way to reach me. I thought it was fine until 2 weeks ago. It was Friday night, a long week at work. For the first time in a while, I let myself relax. I smoked a little, played video games with some friends. The night was mine. I had my headphones on, fully immersed, when I felt it. A sound like a knock, just on the edge of my awareness. I pulled my headphones off, my heart skipping. It must have been my upstairs neighbors. They have a kid who's probably staying up late. I shrugged it off, put my headphones back on. Mistake. Then I went on, but that sound kept coming. Knock, knock. Just faint, rhythmic tapping, like something waited. I ignored it at first. Maybe it was the weed playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired. But then, by 2 a.m., I'd had enough. I logged off, crawled into bed, and scrolled through my phone before I could sleep. That's when I heard it again. Slow, deliberate, no mistaking it now. A knock, right at my front door. My stomach dropped. I sat up, heart racing. My mind scrambled for answers. Emergency? A late night visitor? But why hadn't they knocked harder? Why wasn't there panic in the knock? Why so patient? I slid out of bed, my breath shaky. I moved carefully, trying not to make a sound. I grabbed my phone, using its flashlight to guide my steps, but turned it off before reaching the door. I didn't want them to know I was awake. I crept forward, pressing my eye into the peephole. The cold rush of dread flooded my veins. There was someone standing there. Their back was to me. The hallway was a dead end. It's not like they were facing another door. Nothing, just staring at a wall. Tall, broad, dressed in black. The sound of their breathing, deep, slow, and heavy, echoed through the silence. My skin crawled, my mouth went dry. My skin crawled and my mouth went dry. Every instinct in me screamed at me to move, to do something. But I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching through the peephole. And then, it twitched. Not a step, not a turn, but a violent shudder, like something inside it was broken. A glitch. The body was unhinged for just a second. It did that a few more times. It seemed to jerk backward, though it didn't turn. It wasn't a normal retreat. It was moving backwards, but not towards me. It was almost mechanical. I kept looking through the peephole. The hallway was empty, and it stayed empty. I barely slept that night. Every little noise made me flinch. Every shadow felt wrong. The knocking, though, it didn't stop. Every night, at exactly 2:30 a.m., it came. Slow, methodical, unhurried. And I couldn't stop myself. I crept to the door, heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. It was always there. Always in the same spot. Always facing the wall. The second I saw it, my stomach would twist up with dread, like ice spreading through my veins. But still, I'd check. I had to. Maybe I thought if I didn't, it would get worse. My bad habit had the best of me, and I truly couldn't ignore it. I know what some of you were thinking. Why didn't you call the police, or go stay somewhere else? Well, I had nowhere else to stay. And what was I going to tell the police? Some guy knocks on my door, and I don't answer, and then he leaves me alone? This was definitely creepy, but it was probably some stupid prank that's gone too far. Last night, though, something changed. The knocking started like usual, the rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the door, but I was already in bed. I hadn't fallen asleep yet. I sighed and rolled over, ready to check it as I always did. But this time, when I looked through the peephole, there was nothing. Nothing at all. No one stood in the hallway. No tall, broad figure. Just empty space. I was already pulling away from the door when I heard it. This time, it came from behind me. The knocking was at my bedroom door. My blood ran cold. My body froze. The knocking came again, slow and deliberate. I turned my head, panic rising in my chest. The hallway was dark. The bedroom door shut tight. Knock, knock, knock. Louder, rattling the wood. My legs trembled and I froze between my front door and my bedroom door. I didn't know what to do. The doorknob turned. I stumbled backwards, gasping. My heart felt like it was about to explode. The air grew thick, suffocating. My breaths came in shallow bursts, like I couldn't get enough oxygen. Knock, knock, knock. Knock, knock, knock. The last one was a crash. A thunderous bang that shook the walls. And then silence. I didn't move. I couldn't move. It felt like hours before the first light of morning crept through the blinds. Only then did I dare to go into my bedroom. It was empty. Tonight, I know it will come again, but I won't look. Not this time, because I know if I do, I won't be looking at it. It will be looking at me. My housemate is dead, but everyone is pretending she's not. Has anyone ever been in a situation like this before? So, anyway, it all started last week. I live with 4 roommates. Jess, Lily, Dane, and Miguel. Lily is the one who I'm pretty sure is dead, even though my housemates all say she's pretending. And at first I did think she was pretending. It's an old trick of hers. She's super introverted, and sometimes, if she's overwhelmed or just doesn't want to talk, she'll pretend to be asleep. We call it her playing possum. But now she's been playing possum for nearly a week. Her eyes are open, her face is grayish white, and has been turning kind of purplish. Her body is bloating, and I saw a fly land in her eyeball, and I think it laid eggs there. She hasn't changed out of her panda onesie since she started playing possum last Monday. She smells. She smells like a corpse smells. Like rotting meat and that panda onesie. Panda suit is so gross. I'm pretty sure she died in it last Monday, and everyone is just in some sort of denial. But does that even make sense? I mean, how is it 3 other people are all saying she's alive, and that I'm delusional? Is it just some bizarre social experiment? I keep waiting for some reality TV host to pop out from behind a potted plant and hit an audience start laughing or clapping. I feel like I'm coming unglued from reality. I'm sitting on the sofa as I write this, by the way. Sitting here, looking across the TV room at Lily, who is propped up in the same chair she died in. Eyes wide open, flesh bloating and lips purplish, and skin just... I think she's going to start leaking into that chair. But let me rewind us to last Sunday. Sunday is when we hit the old lady's cat. It wasn't on purpose. We'd all had a bit too much to drink, and I was driving. Dane was in the passenger seat, and Jess and Miguel and Lily were in the back. And the cat, it just freaking raced out into the road. Solid black, and then there was a thump. My stomach flipped. And then this old woman came out of her house and saw her cat had been hit and screamed and screamed. Lily told her that she should have kept her cat inside, not let it wander near a busy road. Anyway, long story short, I think that lady was a witch and hexed us all for killing her cat. More specifically, I think she hexed Lily. I mean, I don't think. I know. Because the woman said some words in a strange language, and we all called her crazy and drove home. So, that was Sunday night. Come Monday, when I came out for breakfast, I was up early, as usual. The only other person out in her chair in the living room was Lily, bundled up in her panda onesie. I said good morning, but she had a 1,000-yard stare. I figured she just wanted to be left alone, and didn't think anything more of it until I got home from work in the afternoon. Lily was still in the chair. Same exact pose, still in her panda onesie. I asked her if she was alright. Miguel was playing video games and answered for her. Said Lily was sick and had stayed home from her classes. I hope you feel better, I told Lily. She didn't respond. Lily? I said. She didn't respond. Hey Lily, I said that I hope... Chill, just leave her alone, snapped Miguel, who seemed annoyed because I was interrupting his game. I thought it was weird, but I let it go because he was acting so normal. But at dinner, she was still in her chair, in the exact same pose, and hadn't moved. I tried talking to Jess, who told me, she'll be fine, it's just a cold. This behavior went on for days, and just any time I tried to ask any of my roommates if Lily was okay, they would act like I was the crazy one. I tried to point out she hadn't changed out of her onesie, and I was told to quit being an asshole. She's sick, let her be. At one point, I was staring at her from the sofa, trying to catch her blinking, and just yelled at me and told me to stop being such a creep, that I was weirding Lily out. They even put a big cushion in front of her to block her from having to see me, which she clearly couldn't because she was by this point 3 days dead. I assumed once the rotting set in they would notice, but they just pretended all the harder, and in fact they even started staging her body. Like, I know it sounds really weird, and I don't know why they did it, or if it was some sick social experiment or what, but they moved her. I found her at the table one morning. She was slumped backward over her chair, sightless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Everyone talked to her like she was alive. By this point, she also stank. I mean, to the point I even noticed Miguel and Dane kind of surreptitiously keeping their distance and breathing through their mouths, not their noses, around her. I tried to talk about this to them later, but Miguel just wrinkled his nose at me and said, "Yeah, I know, it's gross, but she's super depressed." Jess says she's never seen Lily this bad before. She's mad upset about the cat. Just let her be. You gotta let her work through this. She'll come out of it. Until then, things like showering and getting out of bed are really hard for her. I almost told him, yes, those things would be hard for a dead person to do, but I didn't. I just, honestly, didn't know how to respond. I finally managed to say, "Dude, I think she's rotting in that panda suit." He chuckled and shook his head and said, "Come on, don't be an asshole." I finally did what I should have done from the beginning and called the police. I said I wanted a wellness check on Lily. My roommates tried to send them away, but I came downstairs and insisted, and pointed to the corpse in the panda costume in the chair by the television. That chair was really gross by now, and the cops went over to examine her, and I really believed, really and truly, that they were all about to be arrested for having a dead girl rotting in her living room, congealing into that chair. But they pretended she was alive, the same as my roommates kept doing. She never spoke a word in answer to them, never moved. Later, Jess took me aside and told me my actions were uncalled for, and that all I did was make things worse for Lily. So now I'm not sure what to do. Update. It's been several more days since I wrote the above stuff, and as you can imagine, her body became severely decomposed. Also, I confronted my roommates. We got into a huge fight. I told them that clearly the witch's hex had done something to Lily, that it was blinding them and we were all living with a dead girl. They looked shaken after I pointed out the smell, the way Lily wasn't eating, was literally rotting. They told me they thought I was seeing those things. The entire house reeked of death. None of us could stand it. We could all smell it. I heard Miguel and Dane whisper about the smell later, but they clamped up at a death glare from Jess. So I finally decided to take action. Last night, I bundled up the corpse in the panda suit and drove it out to the woods. There's these high bluffs out there. I tossed the corpse down some rocks. The animals out there will pick it to pieces, if it isn't already too rotted for them to eat. I came back home and also cleaned up around the house and put that disgusting chair out on the curb and finally went to bed. In the morning, I woke up to find Jess having a panic attack. She demanded to know where Lily was. I told her that Lily left and Jess accused me of lying. Miguel seemed relieved, though. While Jess went out in her car to go searching for Lily, Miguel told me he could finally breathe again, and that it really had smelled bad in here and someone needed to do something. He said he hoped Lily got the help she needed, but that this wasn't the right place for her and she probably needed inpatient treatment. I refrained from telling him I thought it was way too late for a hospital. Anyway, her body being gone should be a good thing. Except, I think the hex is now hitting the rest of us. Because Dane, he's always been a late sleeper. He didn't wake up through just his freak out or my conversation with Miguel. But now it's afternoon, and I just came out and found him sitting next to Miguel on the sofa, playing video games, only he's not actually playing. His eyes stare straight ahead of him, his hands don't move. There's a first-person shooter on the screen, and Miguel keeps telling Dane he needs to step his game up, but Dane is literally doing nothing. Seeing nothing. I think he's like Lily was on Monday. Like the hex hit him and now he's dead, but nobody can see it. I don't know if I should wait for his body to rot or if I should just take him out to the bluff sooner. If this plays out the same way, Miguel won't stop pretending Dane is just fine. Jess will come home and also believe that he's alive. Even the police won't believe it. Why am I the only one the hex didn't hit? Why am I the only one who can see that they're dead? My sister's ex-boyfriend keeps showing up to family events. She's been dead for 2 years. When my sister Lisa died 2 years ago, our family changed forever. We weren't perfect before, who is, but Lisa's death fractured us. My dad barely speaks anymore. My mom busies herself with every charity event she can find, and I've been stuck. Angry, looking for someone to blame. Lisa was the glue that held us together. She was warm, outgoing, always laughing, the kind of person people gravitate to. She loved hiking, photography, and the outdoors. Her death, officially ruled as an accident, was almost poetic. She slipped while hiking and fell into a ravine. At least that's what the police report says. But if that's true, why does it feel like her ghost never left? Lisa's ex-boyfriend, Matt, was never a part of our family. He and Lisa dated for about a year before she broke it off. She said he was controlling, obsessive, constantly texting, showing up unannounced, making passive-aggressive comments when she spent time with her friends. I remember her joking about it once, calling him my stage 5 clinger. But it wasn't funny. Not really. After the breakup, Matt didn't take it well. He kept texting her, leaving voicemails, even sending her flowers at work. She brushed it off, said he'd get bored eventually. And I thought she was right, until the funeral. Matt didn't come to the service, thank God. But a week later, he showed up on our doorstep. It was a rainy Tuesday. Mom opened the door, and there he was, holding a bouquet of lilies, Lisa's favorite. I just wanted to pay my respects, he said. His voice was soft, his head tilted like he was trying to look vulnerable. My mom, who has never been good at saying no, let him in. Matt sat on her couch, talking about Lisa as if he knew her better than we did. He described her laugh, her smile, the way she always ordered pancakes with extra syrup. My dad stayed silent, his jaw tight. When Matt finally left, I asked my mom why she let him in. He's grieving too, she said, but couldn't shake the feeling that Matt wasn't grieving. He was lurking. Over the next 3 months, Matt kept appearing. He showed up at family barbecues, holiday dinners, even my dad's birthday party. Always uninvited, always with some excuse. Your mom said it was okay, he'd claim, or I thought Lisa would have wanted me here. My parents, blinded by their own grief, let it slide. He's harmless, my mom said. He just misses her. But it wasn't harmless. Not when he started asking questions. Last Christmas, Matt cornered me in the kitchen. She was different with me, you know, he said, leaning against the counter. I stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? He smiled, that thin, unsettling smile I'd seen so many times. She told me things she wouldn't tell anyone else. Like what? His smile widened. Like how she wasn't scared to die. That night, I went through Lisa's journals. She was the type to write everything down. Her thoughts, her plans, even little grocery lists. Most of it was normal stuff, like song lyrics, doodles, random observations. But then I found the entry. I think Matt's been following me. He won't stop texting. Keeps saying he knows something I don't. I'm starting to feel like I can't shake him. I showed it to my mom, expecting her to finally see reason, but she waved it off. Lisa was dramatic sometimes, she said. I'm sure it's nothing. A few days later, I saw Matt's car parked down the street. It wasn't the first time. I'd noticed it before, idling near the corner. But I convinced myself it was a coincidence. This time, though, I knew. He wasn't watching our family. He was watching me. Last week was my dad's birthday. Matt showed up holding a gift he claimed Lisa would have bought. A coffee table book about hiking trails. Couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him outside, away from my parents. What the hell are you doing here? I snapped. His smile didn't falter. Paying my respects, he said. Lisa broke up with you. She wanted nothing to do with you. Why can't you let her go? His eyes darkened. She told you that? Yes. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. She told me a lot of things, too. Things she didn't tell anyone else. Then he said something I'll never forget. I was there, you know, on the trail. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. What? He smiled again, a cold, empty thing. She didn't fall. She looked me in the eyes and asked me to let her go. My stomach churned. You're lying. He tilted his head, studying me. Am I? Ask yourself this. If she slipped, why didn't she scream? I called the police that night. I told them everything. The stalking, the journal, his confession. When they went to his apartment the next morning, it was empty. No furniture, no clothes, no sign he'd ever lived there. It's been a week now. I haven't told my parents what he said. I don't know if they'd believe me. Every night, I double-check the locks. Every night, I sit in my bed, clutching my phone, too scared to sleep. I finally decided to look through Lisa's journal again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I missed something. Maybe I was looking for answers. But this time, there was something new. The last page, which had been blank before, now had a single sentence scrawled across it in jagged black ink. He's not watching. He's inside. A stranger approached my car at night with a warning. Check the back seat. I like to think that I take my personal safety very seriously. I don't stand too close to the road while waiting for the walk signal. I have my location shared with my sister and mom. I keep my wits about me when I'm out in public, and I try not to dawdle after getting into my car. If I had only been more diligent about that last rule, I might not be in the situation I'm in right now. Early this morning, just after midnight, I was sitting in my parked car outside my favorite grocery store. I was exhausted from picking up my friend's evening shift, and so I stopped to grab dinner on my way home from work. The store was in an isolated part of town, but I had never felt unsafe in the area. Then again, I had never been so late at night. The second I exited the store with my purchase, the old cashier closed up shop for the night and turned off all the lights in the building. For some reason, I did something I never do. I started eating in my car. As a precaution, I try not to linger in isolated parking lots, especially as a young woman who often has to run errands after dark. Maybe it was the hunger, or maybe it was the fact that, due to a recent breakup, my house hasn't felt all that welcoming in the past few weeks. In any case, I was in no rush to return home. I pulled up an episode of The Terror on my phone and settled in to eat. I enjoyed a few minutes of blissful peace and quiet before a shout pierced through the night. I looked up from my phone and was surprised to find a woman standing in front of my car, waving her arms at me. My car was parked right in front of the store, facing towards the building, and there was only a thin sidewalk separating my vehicle from the store's exterior. I hadn't seen her coming at all. It was just like she'd emerged from the brick wall before me. She rounded my car, coming to a stop beside the driver's side window. She then started pointing at the ground. The universal signal for roll your window down. Fat chance, I thought. Though she looked sane and kempt, I had no clue what her intentions were. In fact, I felt pretty vindictive in always locking my car doors immediately after entering. The woman, perhaps seeing I was making no move to exit my vehicle, then told me something no one wants to hear. "Hey," she shouted. "There's someone in the back seat of your car." My mouth went dry. Time seemed to slow as 1,000 horror movie scenes raced through my head. I could almost feel the piano wire digging into my neck, the barrel pressing into my temple. I undid my seatbelt and prepared to launch myself out of the car. Now that the intruder knew I was aware of their presence, would I even have enough time to run? With one hand on the door handle, I stole a glance in the rearview mirror and saw no one. My car is a compact hatchback, meaning there was very little room for a person to hide in my cabin. Even in my exhausted state, I would have noticed someone upon looking into the mirror. My terror faded to confusion. I turned around in my seat, surveying the cabin with my own two eyes, and confirmed there was no one in the back seat. Click. When I turned back around, the woman had taken another step closer to my car. Her body was barely a foot from my door, and her fingers were wrapped around the handle. There were a few more deep clicks as she tried, unsuccessfully, to open the locked door. I raised my gaze. She gave me an odd smile, as though she and I were sharing a private joke. For the first time, using the faint glow of the streetlights, I took a closer look at the woman's face. Her skin was stretched tightly across her skull, making her thin mouth and nostrils appear as though they'd been cut onto her. Her eyes were so deep-set and ovate. Her teeth seemed both too small and too numerous. I allowed myself a brief moment to gawk at the face before me, and I threw my car into reverse and hightailed out of the lot. For a few disheartening seconds, the woman held onto the door, keeping in step with my vehicle as I backed up. Luckily, she soon let go, and I drove away, my mind racing with the realization that the woman was trying to bait me out of my car. Even more disturbing was the fact that it had almost worked. I wondered if she had others with her that I simply hadn't seen, and what she wanted from me. I hoped I had narrowly escaped a robbery, as opposed to something much more sinister. I got back to my house 20 minutes later. Still shaken from the encounter, I rushed inside the house and made sure that all my doors and windows were locked. My exhaustion did little to soothe my nerves. My mind played tricks on me as I got ready for bed, conjuring up flashes of the woman's face in the dark corners of my house. Once I finally fell asleep, my fears followed me from the waking world. I had a long, vivid nightmare, most of which I've either forgotten or is irrelevant to this account. All I know is that when I jolted awake some hours later, it was to the sound of frantic banging on my door. I sat up in bed, unsure if I was still dreaming or not. My alarm clock read 4:17. It was far too early for someone to be knocking on my door unless there was some kind of emergency, which, given the forcefulness of the knocks, there may have been. Slowly, I rose from my bed and inched toward the entryway. I had never been in such a situation, and was at somewhat of a loss on how to react. I didn't smell fire, thankfully, but that didn't mean all was well. Suddenly, I heard a man's voice calling my name in a questioning tone. It sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Who is it?" I called back. "Brian," answered the disembodied voice, and relief washed over me. My neighbor Brian lived in the house across the street. We weren't exactly close, but I often saw him walking down the block with his dog, Bailey. I turned on the entryway light, but as I was still in my sleepwear, I didn't want to open the door unless I had to. Instead, I called back to him. "What's the matter?" "Well," he began. I heard his voice crack, and he cleared his throat. "Do you have someone over right now?" "What?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "No, I don't. Why do you ask?" "Well, the dog had to go out, and while I was in the yard with him, I thought I saw someone in your front window. Someone who didn't look quite right." I stilled, feeling as though I was in some terrible dream. Turning around and glancing down at the dark hallway, I wished I had turned on more lights on my way to answer the door. "She followed you home," I thought. "She's in your house with you right now." I was ready to bolt out of the door into the cold, but by some miracle, I had just enough presence of mind left to consider my neighbor's words more carefully. Something was wrong. I stepped away from the door. "Are you all right, Brian?" He cleared his throat again, and when he next spoke, his voice sounded slightly different from before, as though he was testing out a new timbre. "Of course, I've just got a bit of a cold here, but I wanted to check in on you." My voice wavered as I voiced a question to my neighbor. "But your dog, isn't it a girl?" Brian didn't respond. My mind reeled in the torturous silence, trying to discern whether the threat was outside the door or inside the house with me. After a full minute of complete stillness, the handle to my front door began to move. It rotated downwards as far as it could before the lock stopped it, then shook as the person on the other side of my door pulled on the handle. This happened several more times as the person tested my lock, and then there was a powerful bang, as though someone had rammed into my door with all their might. After that, there was silence again. I stood frozen in place for another minute. I had no peephole, but I worked up the nerve to walk into the living room and peer through the blinds into my front yard. In the distance, walking down the street away from my house, was a figure. Although I couldn't see the face, something deep within me knew it was the same person who had tried to open my car door. I watched her walk away into the quiet night until she disappeared from my view. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night. I split my time between roaming the perimeter of my house, looking for anything suspicious, and sitting in my kitchen running through the events of the night over in my mind. The most likely explanation is that I had been dreaming. After all, I'd nearly been baited into opening my door to a potential criminal just hours before. So it made sense that I'd have a nightmare about a similar situation. Then again, I had never in my entire life had a dream so vivid. Maybe, somehow the woman really did follow me home. She easily could have stuck a tracker to my car, but how in the world did she know Brian's name? And how had she impersonated him so well? The sun is setting now. I haven't left the house all day. I've been too haunted by the idea of someone, or multiple someones, trying to draw me into the open. No matter how many times I check the house, I still feel as though I catch a glimpse of the woman in my periphery, of her beady eyes and uncanny smile. I suppose I should try and get some sleep now, impossible as it seems at this point. I just needed to jot this down before I went to bed, in case A, anything happens to me, and B, you ever think about blindly trusting the warnings of a stranger. I shouldn't have stayed overnight in that mall. I'm not going to tell you my name. If you recognize the way I talk from my old videos, keep it to yourself. I don't want any more messages. I just need to get this out, and then I'm done with social media. Back in 2017, I was a YouTuber. Not a huge one, but I pulled good numbers. Hundreds of thousands of views. Sometimes millions. If you were watching overnight challenges, urban exploration, or anything that involved sneaking into abandoned places, you might have seen my videos. It was all fake. That's what I want you to believe. That's what I need you to believe. I was always careful. I planned every video like a heist. Research, entry points, escape routes. Back in May of 2017, I got cocky. I wanted something bigger. Something that would go viral. 24 hours in an abandoned mall. It sounded perfect. I found the Cove Plaza shopping mall, closed in 2013, mostly intact. No official security, just a few cameras that didn't work. I brought my gear. A flashlight, night vision camera, some food, and a battery pack. I was ready. At least, I thought I was. I got in through the service door. The inside was exactly what I wanted. Dust-covered tile floors, shattered skylights, and dead silence. I started filming immediately, playing up the creep factor. And then I saw them. Mannequins. Not just a few hundred. Stores that had been picked clean still had them. Naked, broken, posed in unnatural ways. Some missing limbs, others vandalized. A few were arranged in groups, like they were mid-conversation. I joked about it on camera. Something about how this was a real mannequin challenge. I even moved a few, positioning them in weirder poses for later shots. I shouldn't have touched them. By 2 a.m., I was settled up in the food court. The air smelled stale like old grease and mold. I was filming a menu which was still lit up when I heard footsteps. Not the echo of my own, someone else's. I killed my light. Silence. Then a faint plastic scrape. I turned my camera towards the sound, slowly raising the brightness. The mannequins had moved. Not a lot, just a few inches, but I knew where they'd been before. I checked the footage. One near the escalator had its arms at its side an hour ago. Now one hand was reaching forward. I laughed. I was nervous, but I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe I bumped it earlier. Maybe my memory was bad. I went back to filming. At 3:15 a.m., my camera shut off. The battery was charged. It shouldn't have died. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The mannequins were closer. The one by the escalator was now on the first step. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember running. 1 second I was sitting, and the next I was on the other end of the food court, panting like I just sprinted a mile. I wasn't alone anymore. Something moved my peripheral vision. A head turned. Plastic slammed the ground. I bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't stop filming until I was outside, gasping for breath. My camera was still dead, but my phone had the footage. I never uploaded it. When I checked the files the next day, they were corrupted. Every single one. The only thing that remained was a still frame from the food court, a blurry shot of me sitting on the floor, and something behind me. A mannequin. No head, no arms, just standing there. I never went back. I stopped making videos, my channel died. Maybe that was for the best. I don't care if you believe me, just don't go looking for the Cove Plaza. They don't like being watched. Well, that's all I've got for today. If you made it this far, thank you so much. It really means a lot. I really enjoyed finding and reading these stories, so if you did too, let me know. And if you didn't enjoy it, consider letting me know what I can fix for next time. That's all from me. Thank you, and take care.